Welcome district science teachers for the makeup module for June 1st and 2nd PD days, which are part of the 14-hour district professional development that is available to teachers in Alpine School District. So we want to start with this introduction of where we have been and where we are headed for our summer PD for 2021, but also where we are headed in the future. To start with, we want to go ahead and introduce our district science leadership team to you. This is our district website that you can access that has a lot of resources. And under the leadership team, you'll see the pictures of Ashley and Michelle Ormond. Together, Ashley and myself, Michelle, are the science specialists for the district. We are assisted equally by Marie Ramos, who is a science instructional coach and spends a lot of time in the classrooms helping teachers. So if you ever need any help or assistance, she is available for that. And then if you scroll down, you'll see members of our middle school leadership team and also members of the high school leadership teams that we have in place that help develop, were trained themselves, and then help develop a lot of what we're doing in this professional development. So we're going to go ahead and go back to those slides. Another person we want to introduce you to that we'll be working with both this summer and into the future, her name is Liz Mira, and she is going to be our guide through this process of developing three-dimensional assessments and just becoming better three-dimensional teachers and including more sense-making in our classrooms. So Liz has been a science instructional coach and classroom teacher for over 20 years. She was heavily involved in reviewing and providing feedback on next generation science standards throughout their development, and then has most recently been working with districts and in helping them to implement three-dimensional standards, assessments, whatever. We came to know her through some friends in Jordan School District and have really enjoyed our work with her. She brings a very practical classroom view to what we're doing and has a lot of experience in all subject areas because of the district that she taught in Vermont, where it was a small district. And so as a result, she had to teach every subject area, and so brings a real good sense of an understanding of what we need to be doing in all areas. We're really excited to have her helping us. So where we have been, we want to kind of clarify in this video where we've been as a district just generally, but also where we've been science-wise. So we're going to start really quickly with this video that was produced by the secondary content team in coordination with our CTE leadership and ILCs and a good collaboration at the district level. And this kind of tells us or goes over where we've been as a district over the past couple of years. So I'm going to go ahead and play that.
Our professional learning experiences, Alpine School District's vision for learning has become an important guide to help us focus on student learning through knowledge, skills, and dispositions in our classrooms. Our professional learning experiences are similar to that of a journey to visit our national parks. To plan our visits each year, we turn to our teachers and educational experts to help us create a roadmap of where we want to take our students. Each content area is the vehicle we will use in our travels. As we plan this journey, the locations we would like to visit or revisit include the 6 C's, social and emotional well-being, and engagement. Each content area is the vehicle that will take us where we want to go, and equity is the road. Equity means the traveling conditions are safe and accessible for everyone. There isn't a right or wrong order in which we will visit these parks. Each one has so much to offer in its own way. Some teachers have traveled to these areas before, while other teachers may be hopping into the car for the first time. Whether this is our first road trip or our 30th, there are always new perspectives and challenges to explore. Some of us have already visited the 6 C's. There is so much to learn about creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, citizenship, and character. Deliberately exploring the 6 C's with our students makes this a location we should visit again and again. Another stop, social and emotional well-being, has uncharted territory yet to be mapped. However, with the rise of anxiety, depression, and self-harm, we have witnessed many of our students' educational journeys stalling. Students and teachers can't drive on an empty tank. However, schools have begun to help students develop resiliency, strengthen relationships, and gain confidence so that they are equipped to overcome obstacles and get back on the road to success. With the challenges we have faced in recent years, engagement has become a pressing need. To understand how to re-engage our students better, we look to the research of Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and Russell J. Quaglia in their book Engagement by Design. This book focuses on the intersections between students, teachers, and content to promote optimal learning environments through various styles of engagement. Returning home to Alpine's vision for learning, we can see that visiting each of these destinations is vital to the bigger picture. Every time we visit one of these parks and reflect on our journey, we will deepen our understanding of each route and refine our educational practices. We won't have time to hit everything all at once, and we want to appreciate each destination and all it has to offer. We will be, and many of us have been, making multiple trips to different destinations throughout our careers. Spending significant time in one park doesn't mean we don't value the others. Choosing a specific location to focus on allows us to dig deep to refine our teaching practices, while visiting multiple locations will also help us gain a broader understanding of the vision for learning. Each content area is on its own journey, at different places on the map. What is most important to remember, no matter which location we are currently exploring, is that we are always doing what is best for our students.
Okay, so what we hope you will take from that video is just this idea and understanding that as a district, we will be looking at things that are meaningful in all subject areas, and then we will also spend time going through things that are specific to science. So again, focusing on kind of those things that are consistent between content areas. In spring of 2020, the secondary content team, which is where your science specialists, that's the team that we were part of, we surveyed 6,000 students in response to the experience that they were having in that pandemic teaching in spring of 2020. And these were a couple of the top responses. Basically, the students were telling us they were so confused about what they needed to be able to do, and that we needed to be more clear in what we were telling them. I think for all of us that were in that experience, we also didn't always know what we were trying to do. And so clarity became something that we recognized was an issue. And so last summer, as part of our 14 hours for summer PD, we studied the work of Fisher and Fry and their work specifically on clarity. So clarity is the idea of being able to communicate learning intentions and success criteria so that students have a really clear understanding of what they're learning, why they're learning it, and how they'll know it when they've learned it. And so our goals for last summer were to respond to the loss in clarity that many of us lost because we were now teaching in a different forum, and to provide consistent messages across all content areas, to have some common language and common understanding no matter what content we're in, so that when you go back to your school, there are similar conversations happening there as well. And then provide learning relevant to the current situation that we were in. Those were our goals last summer. We wanted to continue that same methodology into this school year, into our 14-hour PD. And so we looked at what we had learned from the 2020-21 school year. And what we are seeing is that national, state, and district data shows a decrease in engagement. And I think all of us that are classroom teachers have that anecdotal data that tells us that students we had a change in engagement across the board. Fisher, Fry, and Quaglia, in their research based on Hattie, they address engagement in several of their papers and books that they have produced. And so our goal for 2021 is to work with that information in our summer PD and to address the engagement gap across all content areas. So if you participated in the Nancy Fry 2-hour conference that we did in April, you will have seen this model of engagement. So I just want to remind you that engagement includes a combination of relationships between teacher, student, and the content, and that our optimal learning kind of comes when those three things are in coordination with each other to a point that students are really clear on what they're supposed to learn and also being challenged in their learning. And so at this moment, we're going to be focusing as a district on clarity and how that helps us with engagement. So now stepping away from the content specifics, district-wide initiatives, our specific science destinations over the last couple of years have been to understand the K-12 science education framework and to start to implement three-dimensional teaching, which includes understanding the science and engineering practices, integrating core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. And as many of you are aware, our science standards last year was full implementation for high school, which means we are now on board with middle school and high school content and curriculum that to be three-dimensional. So three-dimensional science includes sense making, and this is primarily where there's a shift in what we have traditionally done, where we have delivered information to students and asked them to learn it and then repeat it back. In this methodology, the student should be the ones making sense of and asking questions and kind of driving the conversations. And so that can be done by presenting the students with authentic phenomena and problems, and then using the three dimensions to help students explore those and come up with answers. Again, that at the core of three-dimensional learning and teaching is sense making. And so this last year, we looked at storylines, which is a type of curriculum, a way of teaching in your classroom where you start with a anchor phenomena and some questions that the students can ask around that anchor phenomena. And then every lesson after that is driving them to help be able to answer those initial questions about the anchor phenomena. These storylines were what we focused on for our cohorts this last year. So for those of you who are involved, you know that we had 5 meetings and we worked through one complete storyline. We had some food and some fun, and it helped us to understand a little bit better of what this type of teaching and what the learning looks like for the students. If you have questions about storylines, I highly recommend going to the NGSS website and looking for this subsection, what are storylines? One of the things that we have realized is that assessment is different in a three-dimensional, not that it can't include multiple choice questions and content subject specific questions, but really the assessments are more task-based. And so this is where we are going to be focusing for the next year for our summer PD and into next year in science. So the reason that we are doing this is that part of our job is to report learning, and the more authentic that report can be, the better chance we have of helping our students learn. We also recognize that all 3 dimensions are essential parts of the standards, but traditionally we have really only been assessing one part of the standards, which is the content. So helping us move from those traditional tests to assessments that more authentically measure the 3 dimensions and also give students the appropriate feedback that they need is kind of where we're looking. And so knowing the end goal of what kind of assessments or tasks the students are going to need to be able to do at the end of their learning helps us to also determine the tier 1 instruction and what changes we need to make there. And so that's why we feel assessment is a good place to be looking. What our destination is for this summer 14 hours includes those 2 hours of Nancy Fry engagement seminar, the June 1st and 2nd. And if you're watching this, you're making up those 8 hours. And then there's a 4-hour implementation of reflection over both engagement and 3D assessment that you'll finish at the end, and that will be 4 hours. This all needs to be completed by September. So our learning intentions for this module is that we are learning about 3D assessments so that we can develop assessments that will measure all 3 dimensions of science learning. And our success criteria for this is that at the end of this modules of these 14 hours, we hope that teachers will be successful when they can work with teams to determine what the next step will be to implement 3D assessments in our classrooms. And we recognize that those next steps will not be the same for every team because every team is in different places. So if your next step is really to look back and unpack the standards and get to be more familiar with them so you know what is being asked in those 3 dimensions, that should be your next step. If your next step is we understand that and we're ready to start writing assessments, that should be your next step. So hopefully you feel comfortable when you get done with this that you'll be able to identify like what your next step is. There's a second destination that we are pursuing in the science and also just at the secondary content team, and that is to develop some district benchmarks. So a district benchmark test is something that we can give that will be a common assessment among multiple teachers that we can then use to determine how our students, what trends we're seeing across the district. So we have started on this process last winter and spring. We determined essentials and brought teachers together. We surveyed everyone in the district and then brought a group of teachers together to look through those and identify where we want to start. And we want to clarify that the word essential doesn't mean that it's more important necessarily than others, but we feel like this is an area where we can confidently measure with a common assessment, and it's a place that teachers would like resources, and that's where we're going to start. We would eventually like to have these common assessments for every standard, but this time we're going to start with where we've identified is our first step, which we're calling essentials. So we're going to write 3D assessment questions. Those of you who are doing this as a makeup module, some of that writing has already started. And then once we've got some sample questions, we're going to have a review committee look at them. And then hopefully this year we'll pilot at least one standard of questions in each content area. And then our next step will be to analyze that baseline data from the pilots and start to determine what our next steps are. So the district benchmarks will help us to guide our next steps and do it in a more data supported way. Why do we need district benchmarks, or why are we pursuing this? We and all stakeholders want to see us using data-driven decision-making, as I mentioned before. And currently, what we have access to is RISE, Aspire, and ACT, which gives us a predictor of college readiness to some degree, but doesn't really give us any specific data on grade level content or skills. So using that data to be able to decide what are our next steps in science, it just really isn't there. Also, something that you should know is that the Aspire measures 8th grade content. So the RISE test is an ACT predictor test, and Aspire is what the 9th and 10th grade students take, and then ACT is what 11th grade students take. And the Aspire and RISE will measure content that all students have been able to take up to the point that they're at. And so as 9th and 10th graders, the common curriculum that all students have previously been part of is 8th grade. So we, even from that test, even getting information back, we don't get information about where our 9th and 10th graders are related to specific content. So that's where a district benchmark will help us. There are some state benchmarks that have been produced. They are delivered through Rise and Pearson. They were new this last February, and currently we as a district don't have access to them, and we're working on that so that you'll have those as resources as well. But for us as a district to have data that we can use and that is relevant and important to us, we feel like the next step is for us to write our own assessments. And from this, we hope to get some quantitative data for us to advocate for students, for resources for you as teachers, to be accountable for funds we have already gotten. More and more from our school board and district leadership, we're getting asked, what is the evidence that this money that we've already spent is working? And so this is a way for us to be able to answer those questions. And more than anything, we want to provide opportunities to address areas for growth so that when we find trends in the data that say, as a district, there's something we need to work on, that we can use our resources, pool our collective knowledge, and get better at that across the district. So we know that change can be difficult and overwhelming, and we are all coming off of a post-pandemic year of teaching, and there's been a lot of trauma, and many of us are very fatigued. And that is 100% fair, and we want you to know that we acknowledge that. So don't panic. This image that I have right here is called the Strengths Finders book, and it's just something that's been really helpful in the work I've been able to do with my team. And it's a book that evaluates your skill set and explains what kind of learner that you are, or what kind of team player you are. And the reason I put this here with this picture of people jumping out of an airplane is because I am personally one of those people who sees stuff like this and then I jump really fast without maybe having all the answers. And that means we make progress, but as a team, it can be messy. And that's one way of moving forward. I'm grateful to have a team who has a lot of different strengths. Collectively, our team has different strengths. And so while I'm jumping and kind of pushing forward, there are other people who are saying, okay, but here's some things that you need to think about. So what we don't want you to do is panic and feel like you have to take on everything at once. We want you to use the strengths of your team to determine your next steps. As you start to learn about 3D assessments, one of the things we do as teachers is often jump to, well, what does this look like in Skyward? And so what we would like you to do is to determine the philosophy before implementation. So don't let the logistics of how are we going to make this work in Skyward, or how am I going to logistically grade these or whatever. Well, that is something that has to be addressed, and we will address it. We want you to kind of think through, what would these assessments do for you and your students? And then let's think about make them work for us on the back end. We understand that within your team, you have to maintain what's called automaticity. And that's one of the things that's been so traumatic about moving to online and doing hybrid teaching and all of the things that we've done this last year, is that the things that we could do automatically and we didn't have to spend brain capacity on developing, we now had to do that. We now had to have our lessons where we could normally come in and we already knew what we did and we had the supplies ready. We all had to start recreating things. And so we've lost a lot of automaticity, and that when nothing is automatic, it makes it impossible for us to learn and move forward. So we're hoping that you have all had some time to look at how much you've accomplished over the last year and determine what for you can't change, what for you has to stay the same this next year to keep you sane. And that's okay. Maintain that automaticity, but change something. As we have been through the district, and Ashley and I, who are teaching and also learning about this at the same time, we know it's safe to say that we all have room to grow. Even those of us who have now been doing this work for 3 or 4 years have room to grow. So what we don't want to do is have people say, well, we're already doing this, because we're not already doing this. This is significantly different, and there has to be some movement forward. So moving forward, just let your team guide what that next step is, but make that next step. All right, so this concludes the introduction. I wanted you to have the same experience that our teachers that were in person had. If you have questions about any of this information, please email me, Michelle Ormond, or Ashley Russin, and we can clarify any points that you've heard in this presentation. Thank you.